Okay. So welcome everyone, and it's a huge honor me to welcome you today to our Tuesday Total Wellness. And we are so excited that we have our favorite Brenda here, and I know she doesn't need much introduction, but for those of you who are meeting us for the first time, I'm Dr. Shobha Rayapudi, and I'm the co-founder of Gift of Health. And today I have our esteemed Brenda Davis. She is a plant-based trailblazer. She's a registered dietitian, and she is an author of internationally best-selling books, and she has authored Plant-Powered Protein. And I know, like, you guys have so many questions about, okay, does it matter from what source we are getting the protein? And we hear this a lot. I mean, uh, no doubt, protein is essential, like we all need it. And we just fall into the trap forgetting, does it even matter from where we are getting our protein? And even if we are in the plant-based world, we always say, oh, as long as you get enough calories, like you can assure that you're getting enough protein. So I know there are a lot of myths, a lot of concepts around this protein, which Brenda is really going to talk about it and bust those myths. And I mean, you will love this. And that's why I'm so excited to get this started. And so without further ado, like Brenda will be presenting. So feel free to type in your questions in your chat, and we will leave some time after the presentation, and I will definitely ask all your questions. So feel free to type in the chat, and while that, like, enjoy the presentation by Brenda. So Brenda, welcome so much, and I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to all the participants who have taken the time to listen. I hope that it will be of value for you.
Sure, it will. So yeah, so you can share.
I can go ahead and share.
Yes, yeah, you can go ahead and share your screen, Brenda.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. And I will start my presentation. Let's see, get it there. Yes. Everybody can see it now?
Yes, we can see it, Brenda.
Oh, perfect. Oh, wonderful. I always like when that works. Well, thank you so much, Shobha. It's just so nice to be with you today. I'm actually in Calgary, Alberta, and it is 27 degrees here today.
Really?
It's kind of shocking, and it's going to be 27 tomorrow as well. So we are having an extension of our summer. So that's exciting.
Oh my God. I mean, I would love that temperature.
You don't expect that for Calgary. So I'm a happy camper. I'm going to take my granddaughter for a walk after this.
Oh, nice.
In that beautiful weather. But today I'm presenting plant-powered protein, and there's so much to cover. So we'll just get started. So first of all, we're going to talk just very briefly about protein science, and then we'll look at the two key issues surrounding plant protein. First, the quality issue, and second, the quantity issue. And then we'll touch on practical pointers for ensuring that you get sufficient protein at every stage of life. And then we'll talk a little bit about the most helpful protein sources. And then we'll touch on the advantages of plant versus animal protein. And we will conclude by talking just a little bit about the benefits of plant protein beyond human health. So let's get started. Benjamin Franklin once said there are only two certainties in life, death and taxes. Well, I would argue that for people eating plant-based, there's a third, and that is getting asked the question, where do you get your protein? I don't think there's a single plant-based eater on the planet that hasn't been asked that question. I love this cartoon. It's this little, I think a fox, I'm not sure, but he's asking this huge gorilla, no meat at all. Are you sure you're getting enough protein? And the point being that we have a very strong cultural bias towards meat being the only real source of protein. Few people actually realize that plant foods provide ample protein for people. While legumes are the most concentrated plant sources of protein, grains, surprisingly, provide about half of the world's protein. So let's talk just a bit about protein science. So what are proteins? Well, proteins are very complex macronutrients, and macronutrients mean nutrients that we need in very large amounts. So there are three macronutrients: protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And proteins are composed of very long strains of amino acids linked together. And this is an example of insulin, which is a very simple protein comparatively. You can see it has two chains of amino acids, 21 amino acids in one chain and 30 amino acids in the second chain. There are actually 20 different amino acids that are used to make proteins in the body, 9 of which we can't produce, and we have to get them from food. And those 9 amino acids are called essential amino acids. So why do we need protein? Why is it so important? Well, you wouldn't believe it, but our bodies actually have at least 10,000 different types of protein in them. And every single type performs a unique job. And those jobs are absolutely critical to our structure. So protein is absolutely critical for our muscles, our bones, our ligaments, our skin. Every cell of the body has some protein in it. And then for function as well. So we think of all of the body functions: fluid and electrolyte balance, pH balance, immunity, energy metabolism, growth and maintenance, transport of nutrients, communication. All of these things depend on protein. So protein has a lot of jobs in the body. So let's move on to talking about our two key issues. So the quality issue and then the quantity issue. So let's begin with quality. When we think about protein quality, the sort of traditional definition, it really has been based on the ability of a dietary protein to meet human needs for metabolism and growth and maintenance of body tissues. And there are two key factors that have been sort of the basis of these protein quality assessment tools. And one is they look at the essential amino acid content of the protein relative to human needs. And then they look at the digestibility of the essential amino acids in any food. And animal proteins have for years been viewed as the high quality protein sources compared to plant proteins because they contain all of the essential amino acids in a fairly large quantity. And they're highly digestible because they don't contain fiber and other components that can reduce digestibility of protein. Now, plant proteins may be low in one or more of the essential amino acids relative to human needs. And whole plant foods also, because of their fiber and phytates and so forth, have a little lower digestibility. However, and I think this is a really important point, traditional protein quality assessment tools like the protein efficiency ratio and the protein digestibility corrected amino acid scores, these scoring systems actually underestimate the quality of plant protein for people because often they're based on, for example, PER is based on the growth of baby rats, weanling rats. And rats are fur-bearing animals. They need a lot of sulfur-containing amino acids. Meat is high in sulfur-containing amino acids compared to plant foods. And so human needs are quite different. And so we underestimate the quality of plant protein for people using those tools. So let's get to the big quality question. Can we actually get sufficient of all of the essential amino acids from plant foods? And the answer is absolutely, positively yes. All whole plant foods contain all 20 amino acids, including all 9 essential amino acids. Now, some foods are low, and not all, but some plant foods are low in one or more essential amino acid relative to human needs. And that might be an issue if we lived on a single food, like very poor people that may be eating only rice for periods of time. But we tend to eat a variety of foods. And when we eat foods from all food groups, including legumes and grains and nuts and seeds, and of course, even vegetables and fruits, of course, it's not difficult to meet our needs for all essential amino acids. Now, of course, people wonder if we need to complement. So grains are a little bit low in lysine, and beans may be a little bit low in methionine. Do we need to eat them together to ensure we get ample amounts of all of those essential amino acids? And the answer is no, we don't need to do that. Years ago, people believed that vegetarians needed to do this food combining to ensure a sufficient supply of all essential amino acids at every meal. We now know this is unnecessary because we store excess amino acids in essential amino acids in protein pools in our body, and we draw on those pools. Say all we eat is a piece of toast for breakfast. We need a little extra lysine. We draw on our protein pools to get the lysine that's needed to build the proteins we have to build. So we can get sufficient essential amino acids from plants by eating a variety of plants over the course of the day and eating enough calories. Regularly consuming foods from the legume group, which are higher in lysine, can really help to ensure needs are met throughout the life cycle, especially during those vulnerable times like during childhood and pregnancy and lactation, for example. So when we look at digestibility, protein digestibility is actually reduced by several components in foods like fiber and trypsin inhibitors and tannins and phytates and lectins and products of the Maillard reaction, which is products from browning of foods. And compared to animal products, protein digestibility is about 10 to 15% lower in whole plant foods that are high in fiber, but it's about the same in lower fiber plant foods. And just to show you what I'm talking about, if you look at the digestibility of protein from lower fiber foods like seitan or soy protein isolate used to make, soy protein powder, peanut butter, tofu, even whole wheat flour or bread, we're looking at a protein digestibility ranging from about 98% in seitan to about 92% in whole wheat flour or bread. That is very similar to the digestibility that we see from animal products like eggs, milk, or beef at 94 to 97% digestible. Now, on the other hand, if we look at the higher fiber whole grains and legumes especially, we see about 10% lower for most, sometimes a little more, like 15% lower. So it's not a huge amount. And it's important to recognize protein digestibility can actually be increased by breaking fiber down, by grinding, blending, or other food processing techniques that reduce particle size and increase the surface area of the food. So hummus would be an example, or using flour to make whole wheat bread is another example. We can also increase digestibility by reducing or removing fiber through milling or refining, like making, a white pasta, for example, or a pasta that's flavored with some, vegetable juices. But we can also reduce or eliminate trypsin inhibitors and lectins by cooking. So you see, some people claim that, you shouldn't eat certain plant foods because of their lectins, for example, is a really common myth. When you cook legumes, you destroy most of the trypsin inhibitors and lectins. So it's really not much of an issue because very few people eat raw legumes. They're too hard to chew, or even raw grains. We do use some sprouting techniques, and that's an option for certain of these products. And then we can also reduce phytates through soaking, sprouting, fermenting, and leavening of foods. Plant foods can provide ample essential amino acids. And just to show you, give you an idea to quantify this, each of the following food items meets the protein and essential amino acid requirements of an adult who needs about 60 grams of protein per day. So, and that 60 grams of protein would be, the amount that would be needed by a person, weighing 70 kilograms or so, because you think 0.8 grams per kilogram, which we'll talk about later. But basically, or if somebody's aiming for 1 gram per kilogram, then it would be a 60 kilogram person. But basically, you can meet these needs with 2.7 cups of firm tofu, 4.1 cups of black beans, and you're eating nothing else, just that one food, 1.7 cups of pumpkin seeds, 3/4 pound burger patties, 10 eggs, or 8 cups of whole milk. And that's, I wanted to show you this, to show you that even with animal products, you need quite a bit to meet that need of protein, 60 grams of protein plus all the essential amino acids. But it's really not hugely different for animal or plant foods. And I believe very strongly that it is time that nutrition authorities, that scientists begin to rethink the quality question, because while we tend to view animal protein as high quality protein and plant protein as low quality protein, animal protein is very consistently associated with higher mortality and morbidity or chronic disease risk. It is very strongly associated with environmental degradation and, of course, with animal suffering. And I think it's time we redefine protein quality. With our current global chronic disease epidemic and our climate crisis, we need to start looking at protein quality through a wider lens. I think protein quality is a function of amino acid profile and digestibility, but it's also a function of its impact on morbidity and mortality, and its ecological and ethical costs. And using sort of this broader definition, plant protein, I think, surpasses animal protein as the best choice for humans. So let's move on to look at protein quantity. And the big question here, of course, is can plants really provide enough protein for people? And the answer is yes. I mean, people are relatively small compared to these huge animals, even the largest mammals on the planet, that manage to get enough protein from plants to build gigantic muscles. So, puny humans by comparison can too, and we do. And just to give you an example, these two people, this is a Neme Delgado. He's obviously a bodybuilder. He's been vegan since 2015, vegetarian since birth. He's never eaten a piece of meat in his life. This is Jahina Malik. She's been vegan since birth. She's never eaten a piece of meat or had any dairy or eggs in her life. And if you look at these two individuals, to me, it looks like they're doing okay, And so the average person who's not a bodybuilder definitely can do okay as well. So how much protein do we actually need? Well, we have an RDA, or a recommended dietary allowance for protein. And we look at that in terms of grams per kilogram per day. And of course, a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. And during infancy, we need about 1.5, about 1.5 grams per kilogram in the first half of life, and in the first half of the first year of life, and then about 1.2 in the second half of the first year of life. Then for children from 1 to 13 years of age, we need about a gram. It's a little more than a gram for toddlers, and then it's close to a gram for other children. For teens, about 0.85 of a gram, and then for adults, 0.8, and it goes up to 1.1 in pregnancy, 1.3 in lactation. And if we look at that, what that would mean in terms of how many grams of protein we need per day, and of course, the numbers listed here refer to this specific reference body weight that's outlined in the RDA. And so we would have to adjust this for individuals, because not everybody's exactly that weight that's used as the reference weight. But the really important thing to recognize is that our RDA is based on our healthy body weight. So if somebody weighs 250 pounds and their healthy weight is 190 pounds, the amount that they would need would be based on the 190 pounds, not on the 250 pounds. So that's a really important point. And pregnancy weight is also based on pre-pregnancy healthy body weight. So basically, how many grams a day do we need? Well, during infancy, it's about 10 grams a day. During childhood, it's somewhere between 13 and 34. Of course, it increases as we grow. For teens and adults, it's about 46 grams for female teens and for female adults. And it's about 52 for male teens and 56 for male adults. And for pregnancy and lactation, it ranges from about 63 to 75.
So Brenda, quick
yes,
question here.
You bet.
Does it matter like about 50 or 60 years? I know like here we have adults 19 plus. So is it the same all through the adult life, or does it
Yes, so
change?
that's a really important question. And I will be touching on that in very shortly. But I will tell you that the current RDA is for everyone over 19 years of age. In North America, we don't have a separate RDA for seniors, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So very shortly, actually. So moving on, it's also important to recognize that the RDA, or the recommended dietary allowance, is the average daily level of intake that is sufficient to meet the nutritional requirements of nearly everyone, 97 to 98% of healthy people. And so the RDA, as we mentioned, is 0.8 grams per kilogram per day for adults. The estimated average requirement is 0.66 grams. And the estimated average requirement is, the RDA is 2 standard deviations above that estimated average requirement, but the estimated average requirement would meet the needs of about 50% of the population. So just to put that in perspective, we're covering pretty much everyone. There are special considerations possibly for people eating whole food plant-based diets, for pregnant and lactating women, for athletes, and for older adults. And we'll talk about each of those briefly. So whole food plant-based eaters, there's no separate RDA for vegetarians or vegans, as there's very little evidence suggesting that their essential amino acid intakes fall short. So they have the same recommendations as everyone else. However, some experts suggest that people eating very high fiber whole food plant-based diets add 10% to the RDA, a little more for children, to compensate for the lower digestibility of protein in whole plant foods. So if you added, 10% to the adult RDA, instead of being 0.8, it would be 0.88 or close to 0.9 grams per kilogram. Now, if low fiber plant foods like tofu, soy milk, plant-based meat alternatives, seitan, nut and seed butter, those kinds of foods are regularly being consumed, there's no increase suggested at all. Pregnant and lactating women, the RDA is actually close to 50% higher than it is for non-pregnant, non-lactating women. So just to give you an idea of what this means, the RDA for a woman whose healthy body weight is 132 pounds, her needs would be 48 grams of protein per day. During pregnancy, though, it would go up to 66 grams a day. So that's a pretty big jump. And during lactation, it would go up to 78 grams per day. So that means we need to focus a little more on higher protein foods for people who are pregnant or lactating. Now, athletes, there isn't a separate RDA for athletes, but sports and nutrition authorities suggest athletes aim for somewhere between 1.2 and 2 grams per kilogram per day, depending on the type of training they're doing. For endurance athletes, it tends to be around 1.2 to 1.4, and then for strength athletes, it ends up being, more around 1.6 to 2. Now, ultra endurance athletes would also be at the higher end of that spectrum. Now, for an athlete, this is usually pretty easy for them to achieve because they eat a lot of calories. And so, for example, an athlete who's aiming for 100 grams of protein per day would need about 16% of their calories from protein if they're eating 2,500 calories. If they're eating 3,000 calories, they would need only 13% of their calories from protein. And if they were eating 4,000 calories, they'd only need 10% of their calories to come from protein. So it's really not difficult to achieve. And plant-based protein, this is another important concept. It can be just as good as animal-based protein for building and maintaining muscle mass. And we have several studies that attest to this. There was a fairly small trial in 2023, 22 young adults that reported very comparable protein synthesis rates and skeletal muscle hypertrophy or growth in those consuming high protein omnivorous or non-animal sources of protein. And so either way, they did well. There was a study of a meta-analysis of 9 studies in 2018 that reported that soy protein produced very similar muscle gains and strength as animal protein sources such as whey. And then there was another larger study from 2017, almost 3,000 people, that found muscle mass and quadriceps strength were positively associated with total protein intake. But plant and animal protein sources were equally effective in promoting muscle mass and strength. This fellow is Torrey Washington. He's 48 years old, and he's been vegan for over 25 years. So again, he looks like he's doing okay. And plant protein sources actually offer some advantages for athletes, which are not often recognized. So many athletes think animal protein is so far superior, but plant protein sources can actually improve circulation, reduce inflammation, lower oxidative stress, promote a healthier gut microbiome, and enhance our glycogen stores. This lady in the picture is Morgan Mitchell, and she's a vegan track star. She's been vegan for 10 years. So, and it can also support leaner body weights. And moving on to older adults, and this is what you were asking about. There is no separate RDA for seniors in North America, but there are separate RDAs in many other countries, such as Australia, all the Nordic countries, Germany. There are several countries that have separate RDAs for seniors, because the consensus is really starting to build that seniors require more like 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight. And this, getting this amount of protein in our senior years may help to reduce sarcopenia and frailty, preserve mobility and function, improve recovery from illness, and delay bone loss. And so why might older adults need more protein? Well, they tend to have a diminished capacity to digest and absorb protein. They have a reduced ability to break food down in the mouth, often due to lower bite force, poor dentition, and lower levels of saliva. They have a reduced ability to break down proteins into amino acids due to lower production of gastric acid and proteases. Those are protein digesting or protein breaking enzymes that break down protein into to its amino acids. And then they have a reduced ability to absorb amino acids due to changes in pancreatic secretions and the lining of the intestinal tract. And also they have a diminished capacity to build and retain muscle mass. So that's called anabolic resistance. And I can tell you from clinical experience, I've worked with a number of whole food, plant-based older women who tend to consume somewhere 35 to 45 grams of protein per day. And many of these individuals were not at all concerned about protein intake, because in the plant-based world, the mantra is, if you eat enough calories from a variety of foods, you will automatically get enough protein. And this is actually generally true for most people. If you eat enough calories, you get enough protein. But older adults have higher protein needs and they have lower energy intakes. So getting enough protein in these individuals can be more challenging. And some of the signs of inadequate protein intake are skin fragility, hair loss, brittle nails, muscle weakness, fatigue, inability to fight infection, poor wound healing, longer recovery times, and mood changes. And I want to share, I'm sharing this with permission from one of my clients who had low protein intakes. And she said, I was frustrated by many symptoms after following a whole food, plant-based diet for some time. I wondered if I was getting enough protein, but the plant-based doctors I was following told me that protein was not the issue. I sent an email to Brenda Davis and she assessed my diet and suggested increasing my protein intake from about 35 to 40 grams a day to about 60 to 70 grams a day. I feel better and look better. My skin is vastly improved on increased protein. No band-aids, no bleeding, more opaque, much less bruising. My abdomen is receding. These are issues I've dealt with since my mid-70s, and now at 83 years of age, they're clearing up. I think it's really important that older adults know that even on healthy whole food plant-based diets, protein can fall short, and increasing protein intake can be very helpful. And I want to give you an example of how easy it is to accomplish this task. So here is a sort of standard 35 to 45 gram whole food plant-based diet. And this one provides 41 grams of protein. And so you can see for breakfast, she's eating a cup of oatmeal, a cup of almond milk, a banana, and 2 teaspoons of ground flax seeds. For lunch, it's a salad with a non-fat dressing, a slice of whole wheat bread with some hummus and tomato slices on top, and a fresh orange for dessert. For dinner, it's a sweet potato with black bean and corn filling with about a half a cup of black beans, a half of a small avocado on top, a half a cup of chia pudding made with almond milk, and some blueberry sauce. And she's getting 41 grams of protein. That seems like a very healthy diet. Now, to get this diet upwards to over 70 grams of protein, this is all I did. This is so simple. And so you can see in the red text, these are food substitutions I made. And in the purple text, it's food additions I've made. So you can see that I added a cup of soy. I switched the almond milk for soy milk at breakfast and in the chia pudding. So that was number one. We gained 7 grams of protein at breakfast, 3 at supper. So that one switch added 10 grams of protein to the diet. The second thing we did at breakfast was add a tablespoon of hemp seeds, which added 3 grams of protein. Then at lunch, we swapped the non-fat dressing for a more nutritious dressing made with tahini and hemp seeds. So very simple switch, we added 3 grams of protein by doing that. And then to the salad, I added 1/3 of a cup of tofu cubes, which added 15 grams of protein. I made no other changes at dinner at all, other than using soy milk instead of almond milk. And by doing this, I added 31 grams of protein to this diet, bringing her up to 72 grams of protein. So it really doesn't take a lot to boost protein. It can be very, very simple. So just a reminder, average adult requirements at 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight are 46 grams for women, 56 for men. At 1 gram per kilogram body weight, it would be 57 grams for women and 70 grams for men. So how much are we actually eating? Well, there have been 7 studies that I know of that have assessed protein intakes of meat eaters compared to vegetarians compared to vegans. And if we look at averages from those studies, meat eaters average about 92 grams of protein per day in these studies. Vegetarians average 76 and vegans average 72. So they were well over even their needs at 1 gram per kilogram. So what about in infants and toddlers? Are they getting enough protein? Well, in the Veggie study, which is a study from Germany on toddlers, this is the largest study that I know of, 431 to 3-year-olds, and their average protein intakes were 2.7 grams per kilogram per day in omnivores, 2.3 in lacto-ovo vegetarians, and 2.4 in vegans. And if you recall, the RDA at that age is 1.05. So all 3 groups were over double their protein requirements. So not a problem at all. What about older children and teens? Well, there's another Veggie youth study, 401 6 to 18-year-olds, and their average intakes were 1.36 grams per kilogram per day for omnivores, 1.14 for lacto-ovo vegetarians, and 1.16 grams per kilogram per day for vegans. And if you recall, the RDA for 4 to 13-year-olds is 0.95 grams per kilogram per day, and for 14 to 18-year-olds, it's 0.85 grams per kilogram per day. So again, they were all well above that recommended the RDA. So where do we get protein in plant foods? Well, if you look at the amount of protein in, for example, a cup of legumes like lentils or soybeans or other legumes, a half a cup of tofu, 3 ounces of a veggie burger or something like that, you're looking at about 15 to 30 grams of protein. And that's about the same amount of protein you would get from 3 ounces of fish, poultry, or meat. Now, if you took, looking at a cup of grains, like a cup of kamut or quinoa, a 1/4 cup of nuts or seeds, you would be getting somewhere between about 6 and 13 grams of protein. And that's very similar to the amount you would get from 2 large eggs, a cup of 2% milk, or an ounce of cheese. And we also, another way of looking at it is humans need about 10 to 15% of calories from protein. And if we look at the percent of protein in plant foods, you can see why it's not that difficult to meet our needs. Veggie meats are about 30 to 65% of calories from protein. Soybeans, tofu, and tempeh are about 35 to 44% of calories from protein. Seeds are about 11 to 24%. Other legumes are about 20 to 30%. Grains about 7 to 17. Non-starchy vegetables about 10 to 40. Nuts about 8 to 14. Starchy vegetables and fruits are sort of the only 2 categories that might fall below that 10%. Fruits are about 2 to 12, and starchy vegetables about 7 to 12. So if you eat a variety of these foods, you can see it would be almost impossible to be below that 10%. If you were a fruitarian, it might be possible, but otherwise it would be very, very difficult.
So one quick question there, Brenda, if you can go back to the slide. So when you're saying veggie meat, so the question is, so Like, are you talking about the plant-based burger meats that we get in the store, or like,
Yes, absolutely. So any of the veggie luncheon slices, the veggie burgers, the veggie sausages, veggie wieners, those are the kind of veggie meats. So they're called plant-based meat alternatives that would supply that amount of protein.
okay, thank you, Brenda.
You bet. And then ground beef versus spinach. I really want to highlight this because some people see, wow, non-starchy vegetables, especially dark greens, provide about 35 to 40% of their calories from protein. And that's really impressive. However, when we look at a patty of ground beef, so 3 ounce of patty, you would get about 22 grams of protein. It's got about 39% of calories 39% of calories from protein in ground beef. Well, it's exactly the same in spinach. It's about 39% of calories from protein, but you would need 25 cups of spinach to give you 22 grams of protein. So it's so low in calories that it would require a large volume to meet your protein needs from a food like spinach. On the other hand, if you compare ground beef to tofu, tofu is about 41% of calories from protein, and just over a half a cup of tofu would provide the 22 grams of protein that you would get from the patty. So it's much easier when you're eating these more concentrated calorie foods, like tofu has more calories, legumes have more calories. You'll get more tofu from a typical serving of those foods than you would from a serving of spinach, for example. And plant eaters generally get enough protein unless they get insufficient calories. For most North Americans, this is not an issue. Not very many people consume insufficient calories. Most of us consume excessive calories, if anything. And so how do people end up getting insufficient calories? Well, sometimes with really small children, if the diet is super high in fiber, their little bellies might get filled up before they're getting enough calories. People with eating disorders, with illnesses, so they have, a poor appetite. People with food insecurity, so impoverished people may get insufficient calories. People may not get enough protein if their diets are really poor quality diets. So they're very high fat, high sugar junk food diets. So sugar contains 0% protein. Oils, 0% protein. So if you're eating a lot of deep fried foods and drinking soda, you're not going to get enough protein. Even tea and toast diets, like some seniors, eat that type of diet, they're not going to get enough protein. And people eating fruitarian diets may not get enough protein if the vast majority of their calories are coming from fruit. And then the other would be if they fail to meet increased needs. So seniors with low energy intakes or poor appetite may not get enough protein, and pregnant women with morning sickness, for example, may not meet the RDA for protein because they just can't eat enough. So let's move on to looking at some practical pointers for ensuring plenty of protein from plants. So we need to make sure that we're supplying sufficient calories. So we want to include a variety of plant foods. We want to include one or more protein-rich choice at each meal. So that could be beans, lentils, or split peas, tofu, tempeh, edamame, or other soy foods, seeds or nuts, seitan, or veggie meats could be an option as well. Although, of course, veggie meats are highly processed, and it's important that if you're eating them, you're still relying on the whole foods for more of your protein. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the best choices. So, and also you might want to include some lower fiber choices in the mix, especially for children and seniors. So lower fiber like soy milk or tofu or nut or seed butter would be good options. And you may want to also select higher protein non-dairy milks. So almond milk might provide 1 gram of protein in a cup. Soy milk provides about 6 to 8, and often 8 would be typical. So that's another way of boosting protein. You want to aim for at least 3 servings of legumes daily. And it doesn't mean 3 bowls of beans. It can mean soy milk. It can mean peanut butter on a piece of bread. There are a lot of ways of getting those legumes in. We can also get inspired by cultures that rely on legumes as staples. So, for example, in Asia, where they eat a lot of soybeans and red beans, in Africa, where they eat a lot of cowpeas, pigeon peas, lentils, and chickpeas, in Central and South America, where they eat a lot of pinto beans and black beans, in India, where there are a lot of lentils and chickpeas, in the Middle East, where fava beans, chickpeas, and white beans are staples. American legume intakes average 9.3 grams a day. That is less than 1 tablespoon, or about 1/10 that of many other nations. And I don't have the figures for Canada, but I'm guessing it is very similar to what American intakes are. So we can add protein at breakfast. We can use higher protein milks for our smoothies and cereals. We can add seeds and nuts in our breakfast bowls. We can use lentils and higher protein whole grains in breakfast bowls. We can make a tofu or a pumpkin seed scramble. Actually, the scramble pictured here is made out of pumpkin seeds, believe it or not. It's crazy. You soak the seeds and then rub them to get rid of a lot of the skins, and then you blend them and you turn them into a scramble. It's actually pretty good.
Wow,
And then
it looks like tofu scramble.
I know, it really does.
Yeah.
I was shocked the first time I made it. I thought, that's really interesting. And then the other thing I love, which is really borrowed from the Indian culture, is lentil crepes or pancakes. And what are they called? Dolmas or something in India?
Dosas.
Dosas, yes,
Yeah.
dosas. And so I love to do these. And when I make them often, I just use red lentils, and I soak them overnight and then blend them with water and a little bit of salt, and then make them into crepes or pancakes. And I sometimes use them for breakfast, but I love them for dinner. And I'll often make a cashew cream sauce with asparagus and mushrooms and artichoke hearts and these kinds of things, and sometimes green chickpeas in there, and then stuff them. And it is absolutely delicious. It's one of our favorite meals. And then baked beans on, or nut or seed butter, hummus or tofu on toast. There's lots of ways of adding protein to breakfast. We can add protein to lunch or dinner by using beans and lentils or split peas in our soups and stews, by adding tofu or hummus to our sandwiches and wraps. And one of the things that I just started doing, which my son taught me how to do, is to make lentil bread and lentil buns. And this is just, I love these. They're so much fun. It's basically lentils. You use a little psyllium husk and a little bit of, you can use seeds like pumpkin seeds, but basically it's just lentils and seeds, and you get like buns. They're amazing, or bread, a loaf of bread. So very high protein, wonderful bread. And then stir, and you look up on YouTube and just look at the videos on how to do this. It's really fun. And then stir fries and Buddha bowls, where you add tofu, tempeh, edamame, beans or lentils. You can do bean stuffed sweet potatoes, peppers, or squash. You can make loaves with beans or lentils and serve them with a mushroom gravy. You can do burgers, tortillas, tacos. You can use a bean-based pasta to make your pasta dish with, a marinara sauce or whatever. Or you can make regular wheat or grain pasta with a lentil or Vegemite or tofu kind of sauce. And then also make baked tofu or tempeh as well, or barbecued, or however you like to do it. I even infuse tofu or protein into desserts. You can use chia seeds, hemp seeds, soy milk, soft tofu in your puddings. You can use black beans or chickpeas in cookies and bars. You can use nuts and seeds and tofu in your cheesecakes. And you can use, make Asian style red bean desserts. So there are lots of ways of adding beans to desserts. And you can even add protein rich choices to your snacks like hummus and veggies, edamame or sugar snap peas, bean-based muffins, bars, or dehydrated chips. These are chips I made out of, they're made out of chickpeas and seeds and a little bit of veggies too. And then I do them in the dehydrator. They're pretty fun. And then, you can also do peanut or nut butter with celery or apple slices. You can roast chickpeas or soybeans. You can do air fried tofu. You can make nut or seed cheeses, enjoy trail mix. So there are lots of options. So what are the most healthful plant protein sources? No question, it is whole plant foods, unprocessed or minimally processed legumes like cooked legumes, sprouted peas, lentils, mung beans, edamame, tofu, tempeh, unsweetened soy milk, peanuts, peanut butter are all really good choices. Unprocessed or minimally processed nuts and seeds, intact whole grains, and the most concentrated protein-rich grains are amaranth, quinoa, and kamut or spelt berries, wheat berries. And then fresh peas are another option. The least healthful choices are those that are processed or prepared with added fat, sugar, and salt. So you want to minimize or avoid any deep fried foods such as deep fried tofu or tempeh, fried veggie meats, highly sweetened dishes with sugary sauces. And you want to moderate your intake of veggie meats because many of these products, they're highly processed, they're high in fat and salt. And so you want to be selective, compare labels, use them less often. And if you're using them, there are some options that are made with whole foods, like quinoa black bean burgers, for example, which would be a better choice. What I tend to do is I make my own burgers with lentils and grated beets and oats and stuff like that. And I make about 20 of them at the time, and then I freeze them. And so they're ready to just take out and use. And I find that a really good way to do it. So are there health advantages of plant versus animal protein sources? And the answer is yes. Plant protein reduces the risk of mortality compared to animal protein. And plant protein also reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and inflammatory diseases like irritable bowel disease and rheumatoid arthritis. And if we look at some of the studies, I find these studies absolutely fascinating. So the first one that was published along this vein was in 2016. Over 130,000 participants followed for about 3 decades. And they found that replacing 3% of calories from animal protein with plant protein would reduce risk of death. And just to quantify what we're talking about here, 3% of calories from animal protein is 60 calories in a 2,000 calorie diet. That's less than 1 large egg. It's about the amount of calories in an ounce of meat or an ounce and a half, an ounce of processed meat, an ounce and a half of unprocessed meat. So this tiny little replacement, if what you were replacing was processed red meat, you would reduce your risk of dying 34%. If it was eggs, 19%, unprocessed meat, 12%, dairy, 8%, and poultry or fish, 6%. So imagine if you replaced, 12%, you could quadruple these numbers. So it's really impressive. There was another study that used the very same metric, replacing 3% of calories from meat with plant protein, and they found that when what they were replacing was red meat, total mortality dropped 34%. When it was processed meat, it was 46%. And cancer mortality dropped 39% when it was red meat and 50% when it was processed meat. And then the most recent study, over 416,000 participants followed for about 16 years, again, replacing 3% of animal protein with plant protein, reduced overall mortality 10%. And if it was eggs we were replacing, it was over 20%. For red meat, it was 13% for men, 15% for women. For dairy, it was 8%. For white meat, it was 2% for men, 5% for women. And then there was another study that looked at high protein intakes and mortality. Over 6,000 participants followed for about 18 years, and high protein intakes, over 20% of calories from protein, for people 50 to 65 years of age, increased mortality 75%. And there was a 4-fold increased risk of cancer and diabetes mortality. But these associations were either abolished or greatly attenuated when the protein came from plants. So this was only true when the protein came from animal products. Now, in this study, in the older individuals, those that were 66 years of age or more, protein actually appeared to be more protective. In older adults, compared to those with high protein intakes, over 20% of calories from protein, or moderate protein intakes, 10 to 19% of calories from protein, those with low protein intakes, less than 10% of calories, actually had a higher risk of overall and cancer mortality, although diabetes mortality was lower. And the authors concluded that in older adults, higher protein intakes, at least 10% of calories, may be necessary to reduce age-dependent weight loss, sarcopenia, frailty, and excessive loss of IGF-1. So why the protein perks? Why the advantage? Well, protein-rich plant foods provide an advantage because they're high in protective dietary components that are associated with a reduced risk of chronic disease, and they're low in potentially pathogenic dietary components that are associated with an increased risk of chronic disease. So you can see components that we want more of, like fiber, phytochemicals, plant enzymes that help convert phytochemicals into their active forms, antioxidants, pre and probiotics. These are all very high or high in legumes, and they're all pretty much absent from meat. And then you look at the components in food that we're trying to minimize, like saturated fat and trans fats and new 5-GC and TMAO and pro-oxidants and products of high temperature cooking and endotoxins. All of these are either low or zero in legumes, and they're essentially moderate to high in meat, especially red meat. So protein-rich plant foods promote a healthy gut microbiome. They lower LDL cholesterol and blood pressure. They stabilize blood glucose. They increase satiety, reduce caloric density, and support healthy body weights. They reduce inflammation and oxidative stress. And this, I found a really interesting study. This was a 2021 study. And they were basically showing where Canadians get their protein from. And you can see 22% from red and processed meat, 20% from dairy or from poultry and eggs, 17% from dairy. And so that was like, and 5% from fish and shellfish. So 64% from animal products, about 30% from plant foods. And the authors stated that although the current dietary guidance promotes consumption of protein from plants more often, particularly from sources exemplified by this group, our findings revealed that Canadians obtained relatively little protein from nuts, seeds, and legumes compared with animal-based foods, and even cereals, grains, and breads. Substantial shifts in Canadian dietary patterns are required to increase the prominence of plant-based protein from a variety of sources, particularly from nuts, seeds, and legumes, as recommended in the 2019 Canada's Food Guide. So I was very impressed by that. And if we look at the US, it's very similar. 46% from meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, 16% from dairy, which means 62% from animal products, 30% from plant foods. Very similar numbers. We have clear, consistent evidence that people need to eat more plant-based foods and fewer animal-based foods. And national and international health authorities agree. In this article, Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health? One of the most recognized authorities in nutrition in the world, Dr. David Katz, said the following: a diet of minimally processed foods close to nature, predominantly plants, is decisively associated with health promotion and disease prevention. But I think some of the most compelling reasons to get our protein from plants are revealed when we look at the benefits of plant protein beyond ourselves. Plant protein sources are simply more ecologically sustainable. There was a study done in 2023 that compared the carbon footprint of different diets. And you can see at the top keto diets, then paleo, then omnivore, then pescatarian, then vegetarian, then vegan. And this is the kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents per 1,000 calories. Compared to vegan diets, the carbon footprint is 4.2 times greater with keto diets, 3.8 times greater with paleo diets, and 3.2 times greater with omnivorous diets. And the reason is really simple. When you look at the carbon footprint of food, the greenhouse gas emissions, the kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of food produced, you can see that at the very highest end is beef, lamb, cheese. Coffee is fairly high. That's the only plant food in the high end. Shrimp, pork, chicken, eggs. And compared to plant foods, which have a minute carbon footprint by comparison, the one food that comes really close to eggs is rice. And so by switching from rice to other grains most of the time, we could actually significantly reduce our carbon footprint even, further than what we already have. And then, of course, I feel strongly that choosing plant protein is also more ethically justifiable. We slaughter about 200 million land animals for food every day in the world. That's over 70 billion per year. And over 90% of those animals are raised in CAFOs, or confined animal feeding operations. And to me, it just makes little sense to cause pain, suffering, and death in other living beings when it's not only unnecessary, but it increases the risk of death and disease in people, and it threatens the very life support systems of our planet. By getting our protein from plants, we all win. And most of us have a choice when we consider the consequences of our food choices, not just for ourselves, but beyond ourselves. Getting protein from plants, I think, becomes both an ecological and an ethical imperative. And this is my plant-powered protein book. And it did hit #1 on Amazon in a couple of categories when it was first released. So we were really proud of that, and some of my other books. And with that, I'll say thank you very much. I'll stop my share and take any questions you might have. Oh, unmute yourself, Shobha. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Brenda. That was such a powerful presentation. And it actually, like, your presentation answered a lot of questions, actually, because I know, like, those are all the points that most people have questions on.
Oh, good.
So while you were on the slide, like, if you could again share and go back to the slide where you were showing the percentage of protein coming from each group, like from fruits, from vegetables. So the question around that slide was, so let's say if I'm eating 2 times per day.
Yeah.
And if I want to ensure adequate protein intake, so like
Why did it do that?
I'm 69 years old, and based on my current lifestyle, I'm only eating 2 times per day. So what would you recommend?
I'm just going to go back this way. Sorry.
Yeah.
For some reason, when I
went. Yeah. So if there are only particular amount of calories, if I'm consuming only certain amount of, so like, let's say if I'm consuming around 1,400 calories, what would you recommend? How do I rearrange so that I can make sure that I'm getting enough protein?
Yeah, so if you're only consuming 1,400 calories, it's actually really challenging to meet your protein requirements. And so what it means is you need to focus a lot more on the legume group. You need more legumes and seeds. So, and non-starchy vegetables. So you would want, especially if you're only eating twice a day, consider adding in a smoothie if you're able, that has soy milk and hemp seeds and frozen peas, and that's just got a good amount of protein. But if you really don't want to do that, and even adding in more tofu, because tofu, you want more of the digestible proteins. So tofu has less fiber, so the protein is very digestible. Nut and seed butters. So you might want to have at one meal, some scrambled tofu, or if you do a breakfast bowl, like I do a breakfast bowl with grains, I actually add lentils to that bowl so that it's a mix of lentils and grains. You don't really notice that much. Always use a high protein milk like soy milk instead of almond milk. And then, I love the lentil breads. If you make a lentil bread, lentil pancakes, but really focus on these meals that are, legume and vegetable, like stews that have, lots of beans and lots of non-starchy vegetables. A little bit of starchy vegetables is okay. Some butternut squash, a little bit of potato would be okay, but you want to make it more legume heavy than you normally would to meet those requirements. And for some people, including a little bit of the lower fiber, like a little bit of veggie meat or a little bit of tofu is a healthier choice, but those kinds of foods can really make it easier to meet your requirements. And again, blending, like a blended black bean soup, a blended blended hummus, those kinds of things are more digestible proteins. So you want to focus on more digestible proteins. And that's why smoothies are really effective, because you're blending the hemp seeds, blending, everything. And of course, having soy milk in there helps a lot too.
Excellent, Brenda. That was so powerful. Thank you for that. So, Sunita is asking, thank you so much, Brenda. I'm wondering about tofu. Doesn't it mimic hormones and cause hormonal issues?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. So tofu contains something we call serums. They're selective estrogen receptor modulators, and they are sort of like, they're a phytoestrogen or a plant estrogen, and they are much less potent than human estrogen. And in fact, the studies are really clear on this. They're actually probably beneficial, if anything. So what we see with these kinds of phyto or plant estrogens is they can act as weak estrogens in some tissue, and they can act as anti-estrogens in other tissues. And so, for example, in breast tissue, they seem to act as anti-estrogens. So what they do is they'll attach to an estrogen receptor site, but it actually blocks estradiol from getting on. And estradiol is what's driving cell division and increasing your risk of breast cancer. And so children that are raised eating a fair bit of tofu have a significantly lower lifetime risk of breast cancer. Women who are eating soy foods and have breast cancer have a lower rate of recurrence, have a lower rate of death than people who aren't consuming these soy foods. So, and it also tends to reduce, we've got a number of studies showing that soy foods reduce risk of prostate cancer as well. They tend to be beneficial for heart health. They're a really great swap for kidney health as well. Swapping them for meat, much easier on the kidneys. There's some thinking that they may be somewhat protective for bones. We need high quality protein for bones, but those weak estrogens may be helpful as well. So soy, there is a possibility of overdoing soy, and we have a couple of case studies of people that were consuming between 12 and 20 servings of soy a day and having adverse effect of excess of these plant estrogens. But people consuming, usual amounts, which for adults is usually 2 to 4 servings a day, there's nothing but benefit. So So you really do not have to worry. In fact, soy foods are among the best things you can add to a plant-based diet because of the very high quality, very digestible protein, and because they tend to be quite nutrient dense. They're good sources of iron and zinc and many other nutrients as well, and very favorably associated with beneficial health outcomes, including reduced symptoms of menopause in women, reduced risk of balding in men. So there's all kinds of potentially beneficial impacts of soy food. So please don't think that they're somehow harmful. The only sort of caveat I would say is some soy is heavily sprayed with glyphosates, but most of that soy is fed to animals. So soy foods are or soybeans are very commonly fed to cows. Most of the soybeans that are heavily sprayed end up in cows. So they're indirectly consumed by omnivores, who are criticizing the soy foods, because most of the soy that we get for human consumption, often it's organic, which helps to make sure that the levels of glyphosate and other pesticides is kept to a minimum.
Thank you so much, Brenda. So we have one question from Connie. So Connie is saying, thank you for your helpful information, Brenda. I eat about 1 cup of beans per day along with nuts and seeds. I don't like the smell or taste of tofu. Can I substitute the soybeans for the tofu?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I just got into doing this year, which I'm having fun with, is making tempeh with whole soybeans. And you know what? I never liked tempeh because every time I bought it from the grocery store, it had this off taste to me. It tasted like it was bad. And then one time I was at someone's home and they served tempeh that was homemade. And I went, this tastes amazing. It was so good. And so I have started to make tempeh myself, and I love it. My husband is just loving it too. But soybeans are a very unusual legume because they're a little higher in fat than most legumes, and they make wonderful burgers. They're really good in making different dishes. So absolutely, soybeans are wonderful. You can blend them up to make burgers. You can, like I say, ferment them to make tempeh. So, and tofu again, if you don't like tofu, sometimes there are different types of tofus, and some companies, their tofu has a weird flavor. Mm-hmm. Other companies, the tofu is much better tasting. And tofu it's kind of like flour. Like it's like it doesn't have a taste to itself. You have to turn it into something. And so I find marinating it and, doing things with the tofu makes it much more palatable. And my favorite thing to do with tofu, and it's always in my fridge, is to take containers of, like I'll take 2 or 3 packages of firm or extra firm tofu, and I'll slice it into little cubes, just small, less than an inch cubes. And then I'll put it on a silicone mat on a cookie sheet. And then I just sprinkle on a little tamari, or spray on a little tamari, and then some turmeric, and then whatever mixed seasoning I feel like. So a seasoning that's a nice herb and seasoning garlicky mix. And then I just coat the tofu and I bake it. You don't need any oil. It's just baked. It browns in the oven beautifully. And it's quite flavorful, and it can be used cold on salads. It can be used in stir fries. It can be, there are lots of uses. It can be used as a snack to add extra protein to your diet. So it's a really nice way to use tofu. But I would urge you to give tofu another try. I'll tell you a story. It's really funny. One time I was on a radio show, and it was in cowboy country in Calgary. And this was quite a few years ago. And the fellow that was interviewing me was a big meat eater. and he was interviewing me, and he said, well, he said, I sometimes eat like vegetarian things, like desserts, for example. Most of my desserts are vegetarian. But he said, this is just one thing I could never eat. He said, and that's tofu. He said, it's just not a man's food. Just men should not be eating tofu. And so anyway, the next time I came into Calgary, he invited me on his show again. So I made this chocolate pie that was a chocolate tofu pie. And I said, hi, Dave, I brought you a chocolate pie. He said, chocolate pie? He said, I love chocolate pie. And I got him to eat the chocolate pie live on the air. And he's eating the chocolate pie. He said, this is the best chocolate pie I've ever tasted in my life. And I said, gee, Dave, I'm so glad to see how well you're enjoying your tofu. He was not impressed. I was not invited back on that show. But I'll tell you, it was worth it.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
He was so shocked. He said, I've been had on my own show. I can't believe
it. Hacked on my own show. So that was so interesting, Brenda. You actually brought up a couple of points. Even I don't like the taste of tempeh. It was something like some sharp taste that
yes.
I couldn't agree with, but I really love your idea of making the tempeh at home. So Connie is asking, could you please share your homemade tempeh recipe? Could you briefly tell us, I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, so basically you have to buy tempeh starter.
Okay.
And I bought enough tempeh starter to last me for the rest of my life, pretty much.
Okay.
But basically the way you do it, and maybe what I'll do is I'll send you the sort of the outline. There are lots of things online, but the way I do it is I soak my soybeans, and then I cook them in an instant pot, so they're well done but not falling apart. Okay. So you cook them reasonably well. And then when they're soaking, I sort of rub them together and get rid of some of the skins. You don't have to get rid of all of them, but I get rid of some. Then they're cooked. Then I drain them and I dry them on towels. I just dry them like on a, clean towel. And then you put them in a bowl and you mix a little bit of vinegar. So I think for 2 cups of soybeans, it's probably maybe a tablespoon or 2. Okay. And then you add your starter. And so your starter, it'll, I forget if it's a teaspoon or something of starter. You mix it in, and then you take a plastic Ziploc bag that you've poked holes through, and you put the beans and you flatten them into the bag. And what I do, because tempeh needs to be done at, I think it's about 90 degrees, something like that. And our weather isn't warm enough to be having 90 degrees. So I put them on the lowest setting of my dehydrator. I'm sure there are other ways of doing it, like having the light on in your oven, or I'm not sure, but that's how I do it. I put on the lowest setting of my dehydrator, and that's how I do my tempeh. And I just watch it, and then I'll, once it's done, then I'll make I'll season it and bake it, and we'll use it on our salads and stir fries and things.
That's amazing. Thank you, Brenda.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So Donna is asking, what beans and legumes would be better to eat for better digestibility? Would it be better to mash up the beans?
Yes, so those are 2 excellent questions. And that's a problem a lot of people have, is beans cause gas. And it's because of the oligosaccharides in beans that are not digested, and they go down into the large intestine, and they're used by our bacteria, and they're loaded with really good things for the bacteria. They're prebiotics, so they're food for our bacteria, and they help to give us a really healthy intestinal tract, but it can cause gas production. And so there's a lot of things that we can do to minimize that. And one thing that we can do, and I mean, increasing your intake slowly is helpful to allow time for your gut bacteria to adjust to that higher intake of fiber from beans. But several things. One thing that I do is I soak my beans, and I even soak my lentils, because even lentil soaking can help reduce oligosaccharides. You know, if you ever have access to fresh beans, so from a farmer's market, they have fresh, sometimes fresh fava beans, fresh whatever beans. You will not notice a problem when you eat fresh beans. It's when they're dried, and the longer they're stored, the worse it becomes. So when you're buying your legumes, you want to use them up within a few months. If they're stored for 5 years, you're looking for trouble. So, but when you are going to prepare them, soak them, and not just for 8 hours. I soak for at least 24 hours. I often soak for 48 hours, and I rinse and put fresh water on them just to give them time to almost sprout. And that really reduces oligosaccharides. And then the other thing you want to do is cook them really well. And that's why an Instant Pot is so handy, because you know, and even the Instant Pot will say 30 minutes for beans. I'll do them 45 minutes because I really like them to be well done. And I find that makes a huge difference in digestibility. And then, yes, blending breaks down the larger chunks of fiber that cause the problems. And so you don't notice near as much of a problem when you've blended. So a blended soup or a blended spread for your bread is a really good way to make them more digestible. And there's some legumes you can even sprout. So for example, lentils are sproutable. And once you've sprouted them, and I sprout lentils all the time, and I add them to my salads, and they very few problems once they're sprouted. So that's another way of helping to reduce. And then there are several cultures that use various things to add to the cooking water, like kombu. That's a seaweed, and there's different things in different seasonings in different cultures that are used to add to the water to reduce the problem as well.
Thank you so much, Brenda. So this one is not related to protein, but people
That's
are
okay.
Yeah.
Totally okay.
Yeah, so people are wondering, so when it comes to getting nutrients in supplements versus in real food, does it matter? Because like a lot of them, or like, do I have to take my omega-3s, or do I have to take my DHA supplements if I'm on a plant-based diet? Or as I'm aging, do I need to take collagen supplements? So what would you say about supplementing with supplements versus real food?
Yeah, so I would say that most of your nutrients you can get from real food, including a high quality vitamin mineral supplement. I don't see as being a negative thing, to be honest, because there are a lot of nutrients that can fall short, like iodine. Even choline for young women who are, you know, trying to get pregnant. And there are a set of iron can fall short, zinc can fall short. So a multivitamin mineral can just boost you a little bit in some of those nutrients and can be helpful for some people, especially for those who aren't eating many calories. So for seniors that don't eat many calories, that can be a way of getting some of those nutrients in. For most people, it's not critical to be taking a supplement except for a few things. Vitamin B12, you will not get enough from plant foods unless they're fortified. And even if they're fortified, you may not eat enough of those fortified foods to get enough B12. So regardless of what you're eating in terms of fortified foods, I would say still take a B12 supplement. If you eat a lot of nutritional yeast and B12 fortified milks and so on, maybe just once a week, 1,000 micrograms. If you don't eat a lot of those foods, then twice a week, 1,000 micrograms. And B12 supplements are inexpensive, simple, you know, just a couple of times a week is fine. If you're a senior, you may need to go higher. If you're a person with diabetes, you may need to go higher, especially if you're on metformin. So you may need 500 micrograms a day or 1,000 micrograms a day in those cases. And then the other nutrients that are really important are vitamin D. In Canada, we don't get enough warm sunshine to make enough vitamin D. So we need to supplement. And most experts will say 1,000 to 2,000 IUs per day. is a reasonable amount, but the best way to know is if you get your vitamin D tested. It'll give you a good idea of whether or not you're on target with your supplementation. I've seen some people that have to go as high as 4,000 to get their levels up to where they want them. And then another nutrient is iodine. If you do not use iodized salt and you do not eat seaweed, you're not going to get enough iodine. And so, having some iodine drops, or, if you use salt, use iodized salt. If you use seaweed, be very familiar with the amount of iodine in seaweed, because it's very easy to exceed the upper limit of iodine with seaweed. So 1/16 of a teaspoon of kelp powder is about 150 micrograms, which is what you need. So if you took a teaspoon, you'd be exceeding the upper limit of 1,100 micrograms. So this is something to be, and for children, they might need 90 micrograms or 100 micrograms or 120, depending on their age. But their upper limit might be between 200 and 300 micrograms when they're quite young. So you can easily exceed their upper limit with seaweed. Nori is very safe. It's fairly low in iodine relative to other seaweeds. So they can have seaweed snacks, for example, or sushi. Not a problem at all. You need about 2 sheets of nori, the big sheets, to get your 150 micrograms, just to give you an idea of what you need from there. But all other seaweed is much more concentrated. So iodine. And then the other one that you mentioned that I think is worth discussing is EPA and DHA. So when you eat a plant-based diet, you get omega-3 fatty acids in the form of alpha-linolenic acid, and that's in flax seeds and chia seeds and hemp seeds and walnuts, and even a little bit in soy food. So you get ALA from those things, but your body needs to convert that ALA into its bioactive metabolites, which are EPA and DHA. So these are the active forms of omega-3, which we need for our brain, we need for our eyes, we need for our cell membranes to maintain cell fluidity and permeability and flexibility. So these are really important nutrients. And there have been a number of studies that have shown that our conversion of ALA into those long chain omega-3s is very inefficient. And so the estimates are about 5% to EPA, about 0.5% to DHA. And so most people think that's not enough. Now, we do have a couple of studies showing higher conversion, especially there was one study looking at conversion in young women. So this is women of childbearing age, and they were converting about 36%, which is astonishing. And it was mostly to EPA, but I think it was about 9% to DPA, which is the intermediary between EPA and DHA, and then about 9% to DHA, which was amazing. So, and of course, the reason is your body is efficiently converting because your baby's brain is dependent on DHA. A big chunk, over 50% of the fat in the brain is DHA. So we need it when we're of childbearing age. Now, all that having been said, we just don't know enough about our needs for EPA and DHA. What we know is vegans have probably 40 to 70% of the less in their blood, their tissues, their breast milk, all of that. So compared to omnivores, and so that's low. When we look at omega-3 index, we're coming out at the lower end of normal, sometimes even below that. And so to me, based on what we know about the importance of EPA and DHA, and especially DHA for brain health, I think it makes sense to supplement. And it's, a few years ago, it wasn't easy to, couple decades ago, it wasn't easy to find this stuff. Now it's available in many forms, liquid, caps, whatever. They're not that expensive anymore. And so I suggest, even for children, it's not a bad idea to have, at least the amount you'd get from 2 servings of fish a week, which is, you get, if you were having a couple servings of salmon, for example, you might get 3,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA. So if you're looking at that, getting, at least 200 or 300 milligrams a day is reasonable. I would go to 500 during pregnancy, but at least 200 of DHA during pregnancy each day. And the good news is that you don't have to take fish oil. Fish actually get EPA and DHA from microalgae, these little plants in the ocean. And so we're now culturing those kinds of plants and turning them into supplements and making that available for people that don't eat fish. And so, or don't want to eat fish. And so that's a very reasonable choice for EPA and DHA. And the bonus is that it's not contaminated. So fish, of course, is only as clean as the water it's swimming in. And so it's often loaded with, mercury, dioxins, PCBs, all of these chemicals that move up the food chain. And the larger the fish, the worse the problem. So the safest fish would be sardines, these little tiny fish. The big predatory fish are quite problematic in that regard. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you so much, Brenda. So Connie mentioned like my B12 test last month was 1005. I have stopped taking B12 for now.
That's high for sure. That's high. And so I don't know how much she was taking, but if she was taking like 1,000 micrograms twice a week, she might, wait and let it drop down a bit and then move on to 1,000 micrograms once a week or something like that. Mm-hmm. If she was taking 500 micrograms a day, then, it's just, she just doesn't need that much. And if she's consuming fortified foods with B12, like non-dairy milks, those may be providing a nutritional yeast and things like that. That may be almost sufficient in her case. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, and the other thing I want to say, Shobha, this is really important. When you get a serum B12, it doesn't distinguish between true B12 and B12 analogs. And so if you're getting B12 from seaweed that's been dried especially, it's often inactive B12 analogs. They attach to B12 receptor sites, but they cannot function as B12 does. So they can actually contribute to a functional B12 deficiency. So it's really important, if you're using dry seaweed, you need to make sure that you have a separate B12 source and that you check more than your serum B12. Check your MMA, check your homocysteine to make sure that your B12 is in check, that your status is good.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brenda. So I know like you have a beautiful weather and we can't get enough of you, but I want to let you go and enjoy your walk with your granddaughter. So as I said,
thank you.
No matter how much time we have with you, it's not enough. So I really thank you for making time. And so we are so happy, and thank you so much, Brenda. Everybody is thanking you, and they're so grateful that you joined us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for so many wonderful questions. And I just so appreciate what you do. I know it's not easy. I'm in awe of all you do. So thank you so much for making such a difference in the world.
Oh, thank you so much, Brenda. Have a wonderful walk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.